Hi everyone, it's Miss M. I hope that you are having a great two-thirds of the way through the semester. We are at the place where we've completed week 6 in our online section of College Success, and we are moving ahead to week 7. So first, I'll say that week 7 should have opened up last Thursday. I made a mistake in Blackboard and it did not open up on time. So it's opening today, which is March 23rd, and it will be available to you through April 5th. Which means that on April 5th, you'll have 2 weeks worth of work due because you'll also have work that opens up this Thursday that will be due on April 5th. So you'll need to adjust your time accordingly, but I'm giving you extra time with this work because I made a mistake in Blackboard and didn't open it in time. But we have a 10-week semester and there's not a lot of wiggle room there or forgiveness, so we just kind of have to keep plowing ahead. So just to address a couple things, I am at home making this video, and I'm realizing now that you can see a copy of, it's on that side, a famous painting called The Birth of Venus. That's one of my favorites by the artist Botticelli. It's where Venus comes out of the shell in the ocean, and there's a chair behind me moving and a little head popping up. I am not home alone today. That is Jude. He is 3, and he is going to be quiet while we make this video. The topics for you this week are critical thinking and learning preferences, and I'm just going to say a little bit about critical thinking. Critical thinking is a buzzword. You've heard it, I've heard it, it gets thrown around a lot, and it's really kind of touted as something that we strive for in education. So critical thinking, when it started as a buzzword, was all about how we've had so many years of learning and education where we just ask students to memorize things and spit it back out. But critical thinking is when we ask students to take what they've learned and process it in some way and kind of come up with solutions to problems or new ideas. So have you ever seen this pyramid called Bloom's taxonomy? And it looks like you might have seen it, you might not have. If you Google it, you'll get tons of stuff. Actually, if you Google it, you'll see a picture of the triangle. It's Bloom, like a flower, B-L-O-O-M, taxonomy, T-A-X-O-N-O-M-Y. It might also be in your book, and I apologize that right now I'm drawing a blank on whether or not it's actually in your book. But anyway, Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchy of the way that, of things that we can learn or what we as teachers strive to do in the classroom. So the basic level of Bloom's taxonomy is things like understanding and knowledge. And that's when we're just teaching you something so that you know about it or understand it. And it's very basic. And then the middle range of Bloom's taxonomy is where we ask you to start looking at information and maybe synthesizing it or looking at it and putting pieces together. So for example, history is a really easy way to look at this. So the first level of history would be things like talking about the Civil War, and I want you to learn about Gettysburg, and I want you to know the dates and who the president was and why it was important. That's knowledge and understanding. Second level of synthesis is where I want you to start to think about, okay, the Civil War happened, what was important before the Civil War, how did we lead up to it, and what's happened since then? How does the Civil War in 1865 impact what life is like in 2015? So those kinds of questions. And then the top level of Bloom's taxonomy is where we get into evaluation and creation. And what you would do in history, again, if that's your example, is we would say, okay, the Civil War happened, we know that it happened, we can make some references and inferences about why it happened, sorry about this, and then the high level of creation is when we say, okay, well not only can we talk about what impact the Civil War has on 2015, we can also talk about really innovative things that we can do to change both the way we learn about the Civil War and our approach to the things that we should learn from the Civil War so that it never happens again. And that's that high level where we're talking about not just what we're going to do, not just why it happened and why it's important, but how it impacts us moving forward. I hope that this makes sense. So critical thinking, the idea is that you're learning something. Please put your tongue in your mouth. That's very rude. It's that you're learning something and you're kind of getting to a place where you're thinking about it and how it applies to your life. And you can do this in any subject. And teachers good teachers are supposed to get you to do this. So in College Success, I give you some content that for the most part, a lot of my students say this is really basic or I already know this. But the key word there is know. I already know this. That bottom layer of Bloom's taxonomy is know this. The question that I'm looking for is, do you apply it? Do you think about what works best for you? And do you make changes Thank you, sweetheart. Do you make changes so that you become a better student based on what we've learned in this class? And that's where we get to those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So I can give you a midterm exam, which I just did, and I asked you a question about time management or self-management, and that's great for you to be able to write down. You know, the question on your midterm was all about a student, it was Amber or Terry or something like that, and Amber was making all kinds of poor choices. Your job was to tell me what Amber should do differently. That's your critical thinking assessment. But the real test is not what happens on your midterm. It's not what you write down. The real assessment of whether or not you get anything out of this class is if you are taking the information and applying it, and if you are making different choices. If I say to you, hey, a great time management strategy is to use a timer to force yourself to sit down and study in 15-minute chunks, then absolutely you're applying what you've learned in the classroom. And if the timer doesn't work for you, then something else probably will. So I hope this makes sense. And then the next piece of what you're doing this week is called learning preferences. And learning of preferences really goes kind of hand in hand with critical thinking. Learning preferences is a science or a psychology, I'm not really sure, but it's a theory that says that there's different ways or modalities that we can learn, and it's important for you to recognize what works for you. So, for example, let's say that you have a list of 25 vocabulary words and you need to learn how to pronounce them, how to spell them, and how to use them in a sentence. Okay, so this is pretty basic. Some of you might even have kids who are doing this regularly now. Some of you might be taking classes where you're doing this. I know that I have lots of students who major in nursing, and you guys have to take like medical terminology and stuff like that. And yeah, if you want to be a nurse, you have to be able to spell those really long body part names and stuff like that. So anyway, what works for you? Are you the visual learner who could see perhaps a poster with a body part named or body parts pointing at using a diagram and seeing the names, and that helps you remember them in relation to each other? Are you a student who needs a flashcard stack? And maybe you need to make your own flashcards, because that process of writing and getting it out on paper is just as important as flipping through the flashcards. Do you need to read those words out loud over and over and over? That's an auditory learner. Do you need to make sure that you're walking while you're reading those words? Remember that movie, Akeelah and the Bee? If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it. It's a great film. But Akeelah was practicing for a spelling bee, and she was amazing, but in almost every situation where you see her studying, she's moving a part of her body. So there's that kinesthetic piece, which is to say that perhaps sitting still and doing something stationary doesn't work for you, but maybe you're the kind of person who needs to stand up with your textbook and walk around while you're reading it. Not like down the street, but maybe, you know, pacing back and forth or out in your yard or something like that. But you need some sort of element of movement. Same thing with the auditory. You might be the kind of learner who needs to hear things. You might be the kind of learner that needs to see things and maybe draw your own pictures as well. So learning preferences is all about recognizing what works for you, and I'm going to take that a step further and challenge you to think about what works for you in different subjects. So the same thing that works for you to become a strong math student might not work for your vocabulary words. And maybe to learn those science concepts, you just need to write them over and over and make flowcharts or diagrams, but reading about them doesn't really do it for you. So learning preferences is about figuring out what works for you and applying it. So really what you're doing is taking the two concepts of critical thinking. Okay, the two concepts of critical thinking, which is taking what you're learning from this class and applying it to your life, and then learning preferences in particular. What do you know about the way you learn? What do you know about who you are? And how can you apply that so that you become a better student? So it sounds really simple, but the challenge is being aware of what you need, recognizing those tools that you're going to need and the resources that will work for you, because remember, what works for me might not work for you, and then applying it. And if you can get those kinds of things down, then you can be a successful student. To be a successful student, you have to know what works for you, and you have to be able to follow instructors' directions. That's really kind of all it takes. Anyway, so I will stop there, as this video has become about twice as long as I meant for it to. And again, I apologize for my little peanut being in the video, but sometimes mommies have to do what mommies have to do. Anyway, I will talk to you guys soon, and I'll be grading your midterms and your career projects in the next 2 days. Take care. Bye.